Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Crypt13 and today I just wanted to show you guys some of the testing I did for Yoimiya so you guys can get a better understanding on her mechanics and how during her E skill, her normal attacks are going to trigger elemental reactions. So hopefully in today's video, you can decide whether you want to go Vaporize or Overloaded Yoimiya. So spoiler, I think that Overloaded has its uses, but I don't think it's very viable. But of course, this is just testing on one type of enemy, so we still have lots and lots of other kinds of testing we need to do. But as first impressions, I don't think Overloaded is looking too good. On the other hand, Vaporize is looking really strong, at least for single target DPS. And I'll go into a little bit more depth about this as the video goes on. And then here are the stats for the trial Yoimiya. She's level 88 with around 2000 attack, as well as she's C3 and holding a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set. I know that a lot of people on the internet right now are saying that this is a pretty terribly built Yoimiya, but in my opinion, this is actually not bad. This is a pretty good representation if you want to play Yoimiya as a sub-DPS support character. 2000 attack is pretty good in my opinion. The only thing she's missing is pyro damage bonus, but her constellations gives her 25% pyro damage bonus when she hits a crit, so that's basically half the power of a goblet. So for people that are just going to be getting her at C0, this is actually not a terrible representation of what you'll get. She's also holding the 5-star bow, so if you're not pulling for that, then yeah, I stand by my opinion that this is actually a pretty decently built Yoimiya for a free-to-play player, or for a low spender who's willing to spend on Yoimiya but not on her weapon. It's definitely a little bit weaker, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is exactly what a properly built Yoimiya is, but this is still pretty decent. It's not absolutely terrible like a lot of people are saying. She's also already doing massive single target damage, so that on top of her ability to give just extra attack bonus to the rest of the team sounds like a pretty good package to me. So first off here, we are testing Vaporize, and I made sure to clear the Hydro from the beach and make sure that I'm actually applying Hydro with Xingqiu. And you can clearly see that Yoimiya is vaporizing a lot of her hits. More specifically, I can slow down this footage and tell you exactly which hits are being vaporized. When she first starts her combo, the first arrow from her first normal attack vaporizes, and then her third normal attack, and then her fifth normal attack. When she starts her second rotation, her third normal attack and her fifth normal attack get vaporized. I couldn't go further than this because I would have killed the enemy and it would have ended my trial. But if the fifth hit is getting vaporized and then the next hit that gets vaporized is the third hit, I think we can pretty safely assume that on her third rotation, her third and fifth hit are going to vaporize as well. So it's actually pretty consistently that we are triggering an elemental reaction on our third and fifth normal attack, which have very high scaling, especially when she's in her E skill. A vaporizing Yoimiya does absolutely insane single target damage. In terms of her elemental burst though, you cannot vaporize every explosion if you trigger one every 2 seconds due to internal cooldown timer. This is because elemental reactions have a 2.5 second cooldown before you can trigger another elemental reaction, unless there are exceptions to the move, which there are some moves that have that. But Yoimiya's elemental burst is not one of them. The initial hit also shares an internal cooldown with the explosions. So this means that every other explosion is going to trigger Vaporize. And really quickly, before we move on to Overload, here are some basic mechanics that you need to understand about her E skill. Her E skill will generate an elemental particle when you hit an enemy. There is about a 2-second cooldown for when you can generate another particle, a little bit over 2 seconds. So that means if you are hitting your enemies throughout the entire duration of your E skill, you're going to generate about 4 particles. And next is that Yoimiya can do 3 entirely full normal attack combos during the entire 10-second duration of her E skill. This is pretty awesome since as a bow user, she experiences almost no hit lag, so she uses her time while in this mode really well. I even got interrupted in the clip here, and I was still able to finish off 3 combos. So here I am testing Overload with Yoimiya, and you can see that when we overload these types of enemies, they just go flying, which is to be expected with Overload because it just causes so much stagger. You can see that it kind of works. It definitely solves the AoE problem that Yoimiya has because the Overload is damaging pretty much all of those enemies because the AoE is quite large on Overloaded. But since the damage in this trial for Overloaded is not that high, her elemental mastery was only around around 100 or so, the damage is quite lackluster. But your DPS does increase if you're hitting multiple enemies because you apply that damage to all the enemies that you hit as opposed to just single target. And against these types of enemies that just go flying, when you spam your normal attacks, sometimes your arrows whiff or they just get too far and your arrows stop tracking. So I tried to solve this problem by using Kazuha's E skill to suck the enemies in, but unfortunately that didn't really work out too well. So I'm not sure if there's any kind of CC in the game that can keep all of the enemies together while you are proccing overloaded. Venti could solve this problem, but I don't have them, so I couldn't test that. So those are the problems with overloaded Yoimiya. It just moves certain types of enemies too far away, and you can sometimes whiff your normal attacks because they're just flying through the air. But also, on that note, because they're flying through the air, if they reach a certain height and they fall to the ground, they're going to take considerable fall damage. So you can actually use this as part of your strategy because fall damage deals a ton of damage. So those are the pros of overloaded Yoimiya. It solves her lack of AoE problem, and you can utilize fall damage. And well, actually, I forgot to mention one more con, and that's that sometimes when we run overloaded Yoimiya, Yoimiya is not always the one that causes the overload reaction, at least in my test using the Electro Traveler. If things don't go perfectly, sometimes it swaps and then the Electro Traveler starts dealing the overload damage, and that's obviously not what we want. And since I tested only one Electro Applicator and not Fischl or Beto, I don't know if those characters are more consistent in allowing Yoimiya to proc overload. Is the damage worth it? Because in order to do loads and loads of overload damage, you need to build for Elemental Mastery, and you'll probably want to build for the 4-piece Thundering Fury set so that you get that extra 40% damage bonus on your overloaded damage. As well as when you proc that, you'll be decreasing the cooldown on your E skill as well. So depending on what kind of playstyle you're looking for, definitely an unorthodox style where you keep Yoimiya on the field and you are pretty much ignoring her elemental burst, this could be a good playstyle. But let's look at the actual damage for overloaded. And we already determined the rate of elemental reactions from her vape. Remember that she triggers an elemental reaction on the first hit of her normal attack, then the third, and then the fifth, and then every time after that, it's the third and the fifth. So that means on her first rotation, she creates 3 elemental reactions, or in this case, 3 overloaded reactions, and then after that will be 2 overloaded reactions, for a grand total of 7 overloaded reactions during her E skill if nothing goes wrong, where you aren't interrupted or dodging for an extended period of time. So here is a table for overloaded damage for various different levels when you are using a 4-piece Thundering Fury set and when you are not using a 4-piece Thundering Fury set. I included just 3 levels, level 70, 80, and 90, because generally those are the levels that most people are at. Also, please do know that these damage for overloaded is slightly off. There is some rounding errors, so it sometimes might be off by about 5 to 10 damage. So if we are going with the overload build, we should just put all of our eggs into the same basket and not half-ass the build. So that means we are going to go with max elemental mastery for all of our artifact pieces, and for a 5-star, that means 187 elemental mastery times 3. That gives us a grand total of 561 elemental mastery. So going back to that table, if we proc 7 reactions, which is the complete rotation of her E skill, we are dealing about 57,000 overloaded damage. If you run the 4-piece Thundering Fury set, you will deal 69,000 overloaded damage. Now if we throw in a bow that gives us elemental mastery on the secondary substat like the Windbloom Ode or the Stringless, that will boost our elemental mastery by another 165, which puts us at around 700 elemental mastery. And with 700 elemental mastery, we are dealing about 70,000 overloaded damage without the 4-piece Thundering Fury and 83,000 with the Thundering Fury. And I also forgot to mention that I was looking at level 80. This also includes no elemental mastery substats, so you can still squeeze a little bit more damage. So that was just the overloaded part of her damage, but she is of course still going to be doing damage with her normal attacks, even if it's not going to be as powerful if you ran attack percent, pyro damage bonus, and a crit circlet. So if we're going full elemental mastery, we're not going to be hitting any crits because our crit rate is going to be laughably low, and I calculated her 5-hit normal attack combo, dealing about 10,000 to 15,000 damage, depending on the weapon and the artifact build. So weapons like Rust and artifact builds like Shiminawa are on the higher end, and weapons that give elemental mastery are on the lower end. Also bear in mind that this is only single target damage and not AoE damage. And we also need to multiply this number by 3 because she gets 3 full normal attack combos during her E skill if nothing goes wrong. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering how that damage changes if we swap out one elemental mastery artifact piece for an attack percent or pyro damage percent artifact piece. And unfortunately guys, that's just too many variables for me to handle, so I'm just going to go with full elemental mastery build or none at all. And I've already done the calculations for Vaporize damage in my previous full breakdown video for Yoimiya. I highly suggest that you watch that if you're looking for a better understanding on her kit and some of the math behind her weapons. But anyway, I had to make some revisions because now I know exactly which of her attacks are going to get vaporized. So after making that change, a full 3-hit normal attack combo during the entire duration of her E skill, she deals somewhere around 100,000 to 112,000 depending on the weapon that she's using and the artifact set that she's using. This also assumes a level 80 Yoimiya with plus 20 artifacts, just like the Overload build. And so if we just compare the numbers on a surface level, Vaporize damage is dealing more damage, but again, you have to remember that Overload can deal AoE damage and Vaporize is strictly only single target. We can also add the attack damage of her normal attacks with the Overload build, and it reaches around 100,000 still, but the normal attack damage is going to be single target only. So this is a very difficult comparison to make, but as long as you can keep these things in mind, I think that you can come to your own conclusions what you think is going to be better. But here are my thoughts. I think that each of these builds kind of have their different uses, and one build is going to be stronger than another build in certain situations. If you're fighting a bunch of hilly churls or treasure hoarders, the overloaded build might be better, or maybe even against Geo Vishaps so that we can stagger lock them with the overloaded procs while dealing AoE damage to both of them, because double Geo Vishaps are very common in the Abyss, and similarly to the elemental Fatui skirmisher enemies. But if you're fighting a singular boss, then the Vaporize build might be better. And also please bear in mind that in my testing, sometimes Yoimiya did not proc overloaded every single time, so if that happens, the damage that we're seeing here is not actually truly reflective of what you would see in game. And actually the Vaporize build can do a little bit more damage because the 100,000 to 112,000 damage that I calculated was only using a 2-piece Crimson Witch set with 2-piece Gladiator and not a 4-piece Crimson Witch set, which 4-piece Crimson Witch boosts the power of our Vaporize by an extra 15%. So it's really hard for me to say which one's better, but what I can say is that talking from just a purely numbers standpoint, the overloaded build can work. It's just that when we bring this into practical situations, it might not fare as well as we think it's going to fare. And if I'm being honest, the overload build actually does sound like a lot of fun to play, and if it turns out that it doesn't work, we can also just throw this onto a Lisa and start maining overloaded Lisa. Whereas with the Vaporize build, we know it works, so there isn't very many things we need to worry about. So let me know down in the comments, guys, are you going to go for an overloaded build, or are you going to stick to the Vaporize? Or maybe you're going to go for a completely different kind of build. Anyway, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much if you made it this far. Leaving a like and a comment on this video is seriously going to help me out, and if you share this with your friends, it's going to help me out even more. Subscribe to the channel if you liked what you saw, and until next time, I will see you guys later.